Let's move on to effective communication. In past interviews, you've emphasized repetition in communication, and which of course is obvious to me. That's always like my wife is a marketer, and I think of that as marketing 101. But I think that there's something in your past or a place that you garnered that as an important part of the effective communication process. Want to talk about this notion
Sure.
of repetition?
Yeah, look, I was, again, privileged to be the aide to a great chief of staff of the Army, General Carl Vano, during a particularly important period for the U.S. military. It encompassed the Operation Just Cause in Panama, and then Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iraq, and a variety of others, I might add. And so this is a very, very active period. And during this, he had something he called the 6 imperatives. And I can still recite those in my sleep. And he had distilled in his first 2 years as chief into a white paper, which he referred to repeatedly in the final 2 years of his time as chief. Again, these 6 imperatives. And I took from that it really does matter. And so when I was a battalion commander in the great 101st Airborne Division, right after serving as his aide, I remember thinking to myself, I want the soldiers in this battalion, when they're asked 20 years later, what was Petraeus a nut about, not to have to think hard about it, that they should be able to recite the 5 big ideas, if you will. Again, noting I was not a strategic leader in this case. The strategic leader would have been several levels above me at least. But certainly I was making decisions within the context or the space established by the strategic leader. And so again, I set about determining what are the big ideas, and then how do you operationalize them? What does it really mean to say that we are going to emphasize physical fitness? What does that mean? What is the standard? What is excellence? What is the minimum standard? What happens if you don't meet the standard? Literally, how long a day are we going to do it? How do we adjust for that? What is the rhythm of the different activities that are going to comprise our physical fitness regime? How often do we do road marches? What is the standard for those? How do we promote competition? Because life is a competitive endeavor, and nothing is more competitive, obviously, than combat. And so in preparing for that, you're constantly, again, challenging your soldiers. And we certainly did that in our physical training. And we sought to win where we could, noting that you also sometimes have to recognize that you need to be the best team player, not just the best team or player overall. So again, this repetition is crucial. And in the case of the surge in Iraq, it started the very first day, right after I took the colors and handed them back to the command sergeant major and stepped to the podium for the few minutes that you say after you've assumed command. I emphasized the fact that we must secure the people, and we can only do it by living with them. I then gathered the commanders, who were all at the change of command ceremony, of course, and sat down with them and emphasized this again. And by the way, if you get the big idea, the really big ideas can be conveyed pretty simply. It is, we're going to live with the people. We got to get back into the neighborhoods. And we have ultimately, then they operationalize that. And for example, the division commander for Baghdad, area of responsibility, he established 77 additional locations in which our soldiers, generally also with Iraqi security forces, were located. We had to fight for most of those. And again, the enemy, we put them right in the fault lines between the different insurgent and militia and other groups. But that was the key. And then ultimately I published, we changed the mission statement, we changed the overarching civil military campaign plan that the ambassador and I both signed. And then, as I mentioned earlier, periodically I would put out the counterinsurgency guidance. I would send letters to the troops. On the very first day, I sent a letter to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and civilians of the multinational force, Iraq. But they constantly heard the same theme. And the very first one in the counterinsurgency guidance, so these were all a set of imperatives, and then I would explain it. So the first one is secure and serve the population. And then I explain the Iraqi people are the decisive terrain. together with our Iraqi partners, work to provide the people security, to give them respect, to gain their support, and to facilitate establishment of local governance, restoration of basic services, and revival of local economies. The next one was live among the people. You can't commute to this fight, and so forth. Hold areas that have been secured. Don't just clear and then hand off. You have to clear and hold. Once we clear an area, we must retain it, and so on. Pursue the enemy relentlessly. Identify and pursue al-Qaeda, Iraq, and other extremist elements tenaciously. Don't let them retain support areas or sanctuaries. Force the enemy to respond to us. Deny the enemy the ability to plan and conduct deliberate operations. Employ all assets, so not just kinetic assets, employ all assets to isolate and defeat the terrorists and insurgents. Promote reconciliation. We cannot kill or capture our way out of this endeavor, and so on. So these go all the way through. I mean, some of these are really quite simple. Walk. Build relationships, promote initiative, manage expectations, be first with the truth. That was our guidance on public affairs. You know, you can't put lipstick on pigs. You avoid spin, let facts speak for themselves, and so on. So, you know, in this roughly 4-page document, it distills all that it is that we are trying to do in the direction that is necessary to do that. And, of course, is spelled out in much greater detail.
Sure.
But, again, when it's all said and done, you want someone to go back to those you were privileged to lead, ask what was this individual, again, a nut about, and hope that those you were privileged to lead will, you know, get 5 out of 5 or whatever it may be in a particular endeavor.
So you started out the answer with the word operationalize. And then you gave us actually a fairly operationalized list of how you wanted to proceed. Now, I think that in terms of effective communication, you've given us a fairly full-throated answer, but I also want to give you the room in the event that you want to talk about other things with regard to this. If you do, great. If you don't, that's fine. Also, things like clarity and simplicity in message.
Sure, it's
like,
crucially important. And you heard that. This is a set of
no more than 3 words, right?
Few words. Some of them are a little bit longer than others, but generally they are quite straightforward. And then there's an explanation. And so that's what we sought to do. And by the way, the last one was always learn and adapt, because we want to be a learning organization. We actually used to say that the side that learns the fastest prevails in this kind of fight. And that was a key element of the counterinsurgency field manual.
So I agree with that, even from the notion of startup founders as well, right?
Absolutely. And by the way, I should just note that, again, in addition to being a partner at KKR and the chairman of the KKR Global Institute and on a couple of the boards of companies that we own, I'm also a personal venture capitalist and invested in some 15 or so startups.
Oh, you made a mistake there, man. They're going to come pouring in now.
Well,
you think your inbox is full now.
But what I look for is great big ideas, very compelling big ideas, and then the ability of the leadership, not just to have come up with the big ideas, but of course to scale them, to operationalize them, as you say. And those qualities aren't always found in the same individual. And you have to have a founder who is sufficiently self-aware to realize that if he or she cannot scale it, there has to be a decision to bring someone in who can do that. Ideally, it's, of course, the same individual who comes up with the big ideas together with others and then leads the growth of the particular startup. But that's not always the case.
I agree. I on my list, I put intellectual honesty relatively highly. With regard to effective communication, poise and confidence in delivery, the how being as important as the what in your mind, or close?
Well, it's an element. Again, obviously, if you can't communicate clearly, concisely, effectively, compellingly, all the rest of that, then, of course, it is not going to be as good as it should be. And so, again, ideally, you have a leader who can distill the big ideas and also communicate them effectively. By the way, it has to be communicated through the breadth and depth of the organization. And so I was trying to ensure that the big ideas are echoed and re-echoed and also interpreted at each different level, so that all the way down to the individual soldier under body armor and Kevlar helmet outside the wire is, again, turning big ideas at my level into concrete action at those individuals' level. We used to call our young soldiers, in fact, and leaders, we would call them strategic sergeants and strategic lieutenants, because their actions at the tactical level could have strategic consequences, and in a number of occasions did. By the way, not always for the better.
Mm.